Secret Societies today with Warhamster Brady. How are you doing?
I am awesome. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. So many exciting things going on today, but you have something that you posted earlier today you want to start us off with?
Yeah, I got a couple fun things. Well, you remember it was like last week, a week before, we talked to one of the Bonesmen, which guy by the name of William Sloan Coffin.
Yes.
And it just so happens that we were down in a place called Newburyport, Massachusetts, just doing some sightseeing and checking it out, some historical sites. And what did we drive past? This is the Coffin House from, if you can read it, it's from 1678. This is the ancestral house of another Bonesman. So we're up to like 4 different compounds or houses of Bonesmen I've visited in just the last year. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's kind of a neat. I mean, I didn't even expect that to happen. We were driving along, going like 15 miles an hour, and all of a sudden I see Coffin House. So we had to stop the car, turn around, and take the picture. So that was pretty cool. The other thing we did I had going on earlier today is I found a fun little bit of research. And I'll just pull it up real quick. Should have been ready for you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I like the fact that the show's authentic, that we, I mean, in a lot of the stuff as we go along, we are doing additional research as we present the information to you. So definitely lots of stuff prepared, but also it's important to bring in extemporaneously the information that we've collected after the fact that we prepared these notes. So
yeah, that was about 2-3 weeks ago. You and Gordon and me, we did a live research just on air with one of those USAID findings. I got really good feedback from that. We should do more of that real-time research. That was a good show.
I agree.
Yeah, I've got all my research tabs all lined up, and I think it's good to let other researchers know what sources we're using, because that's how I learned some of them. I watched other people digging, so we'll have to do another one of those in the near future.
I agree.
All right, I got my X thread from this morning. It's a short one, but it ties into what we've been talking about. So if you could put that up on screen. Okay, anybody who watched testimony this week, or it was yesterday even, we had a woman by the name of Catherine Maher, and she's given testimony. She is now leading NPR and PBS. Her background is, as I said right here, it's basically a perfect regime change resume. Her background's with the World Bank, UNICEF, National Democratic Institute, CIA front, State Department. This should say CFR, not CRF. I'm illiterate sometimes. And she also worked with Tony Blinken and John Brennan. So this is a spook bureaucrat, if ever there was one. And she got grilled. I'm hoping they shut down both PBS and National Public Radio. So I decided to look into her background a little bit. So it turns out she also sits on the board of directors for the Signal Foundation, which created Signal, which was also in testimony the exact same day. So I'm thinking to myself, is this a coincidence that they dropped this bombshell the day before her testimony to distract?
Hold on a second. You're saying that a CIA person that poses in all of these different organizations, but is directly tied to the CIA in all of these different positions, sits on the board of Signal.
Yeah,
that's
she
what
was.
You just said.
Yeah, she was the chairman of the board, and I don't know if that's still the case or not. We couldn't get confirmation on that, but she's definitely still on the board of Signal. And you got to ask yourself, how did Goldberg get into that Signal chat in the first place? And yeah, I'm suggesting maybe that was done on purpose. Kind of reminds me of Russiagate, a little stay-behind unit that Obama left behind. Did the Biden regime do the same thing? It was the Biden regime that gave approval for you to use Signal for official channels.
Yes.
Yeah,
and they have a CIA embed as chair of the Signal board.
Yeah. And the coincidence that the story dropped the day before her testimony is interesting. So I look into their funding, and you pull this up, the first thing you find is $54 million of funding for the Signal Group from what's called the Open Technology Fund, which comes from the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Now, what does that sound like to you?
Another CIA front.
Yeah.
I've actually looked into them. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to find my notes right off the bat, but they are definitely of that smell.
Well, so who is USAGM? USAGM. They oversee the following agencies, all of which have been used for CIA regime change operations. Voice of America,
Yep.
Radio Free Europe,
Yep.
Office of Cuba Broadcasting, Radio Free Asia, the Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and the Open Technology Fund. So
And anybody that's been following me has obviously come across all of those because, as you point out, those are intimately involved in regime change as part of Operation Gladio.
yeah, and you can, and yeah, absolutely. And are we seeing a pattern? And you can just pull up here and do their own page. Okay, they talk all about what they do. Voice of America, Radio Free Europe. I mean, I got it right from their webpage. So you're not making this up. If we look into the USAGM's Board of Governors, which I always like to see the people on the boards, I'm going down here, and who do I see? But Hillary Rodham Clinton. Interesting. And of course, you go down a little bit further, and you see a guy, former Skull and Bones member, John Forbes Carey himself.
Okay.
Can't make this stuff up. Go to those websites. If anybody's watching, go to those websites. There's a lot more to dig on that board of directors and other stuff they did. I didn't have time to do a full dig. I was a little busy this morning, but that would have been one of those fun live research exercises if we'd done that together. Had we had time to do that?
Yes, absolutely.
But so I'm suggesting that Signal Gate, there may be more to it than meets the eye.
I agree.
All righty. Shall we jump into our normal show?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. For those who are new to this show, we have been going through the secret societies, specifically Skull and Bones, asking the question, is this just a regular old alumni group that just happen to cross paths every once in a while on networks? Or is there something more sinister going on? And does it tie into the bigger themes that we've been talking about, how our intelligence agencies have been using all the different offices of government, both public and private, to manipulate governments around the world using subterfuge, intelligence, things like Operation Gladio, all for the purpose of building this new world order and benefiting our multinational corporations. And we've been showing all the connections to the different families through generations of Eastern establishment, blue blood families that all go to Yale University, join Skull and Bones. A lot of them go to Harvard Law, and they find themselves all in these bottleneck positions of power to really wield the United States foreign policy for their own benefit. How's that for a good summary?
That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, well, we're into the 1950s, going forward chronologically. And we are going to start with a Bonesman from a very old family. This gentleman's name is Charles Edwin Lord II. Okay, that last name Lord we've seen before. And we're going to get a few Lords today. He was a Bonesman class of 1949, which means he was there the same time as George H.W. Bush. He's born in 1933 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Of course, Eastern Seaboard. His father was somewhat interesting. His name is William Gailey Lord. The Gailey family has some history. I didn't find anything worth mentioning. William Gailey Lord was a Yale grad in engineering, and he worked for General Electric for a number of years before becoming a director at Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company.
Sorry.
Well, go ahead and tell them why you're laughing, because that name's going to come up again today.
Well, just that they are one of the international syndicates. You found them in all of the African countries because of rubber trees. You found them in Vietnam because of the rubber plantations there. And just so that you guys know, just a very brief description, When I was doing the research for Gladio and the overthrow of regimes in Africa, they gave very descriptive terms of life on a rubber plantation in which they hatch. It's almost like maple syrup gathering, where they hatch into a tree and the rubber comes out as a sap type of a product. And they use little kids to run these big, heavy buckets of rubber into like these collections. And then, they track them off for processing. And it's a very labor intensive, i.e. slavery type operation. And they had these like Quonset hut kind of lean-to facilities for these people. And in some cases, if the workers demanded improved conditions, they just burn the lean-tos down and not provide any housing for them. And that was the intimidation, terrorization process to keep them slaving away for basically nothing.
Very good. And we shouldn't discount the General Electric connection as well, because GE is very, very intricately involved in a lot of deep state stuff. So, it was once upon a time, it was the biggest company in the world till the tech companies passed it up. So that's William Gayley Lord. So he's rubbed elbows with some of these movers and shakers that we've been discussing. But Charles Edwin Lord II was the first Bonesman of the family. And after Yale, he, of course, gets into investment banking. Now, how many of these CIA-type people came from an investment banking background?
A crap ton.
Uh-huh. And a lot of they're corporate lawyers, investment bankers. A lot of it's the same thing. He works privately, doesn't do anything too exciting until suddenly, in 1981, under Reagan, he becomes the acting comptroller of the currency. That's a big position. What does the comptroller of the currency do? They charter, regulate, and supervise all national banks and federal thrift institutions. And they also oversee federally licensed branches and agencies of foreign banks in the United States. This is 1981. What's going on with BCCI in 1981?
They're trying to illegally buy banks in the United States.
And this is one of their main oversight, is a Bonesman.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah, I kind of figured that was worth mentioning. And just to rehash an old topic, one of the people that was allegedly investigating BCCI was Bonesman John Kerry, who we just talked about.
And just for all the new people, BCCI is a CIA front bank that originated from a bank called BCCI in Pakistan. And we were all led to believe that it was a Pakistani bank. It was in basically no way a Pakistani bank. The money for it originally came from multiple places, primarily UAE and Saudi and the CIA. And they set up their main office in London, of course, because of the point that Warhamster's made repeatedly, because there's basically no rules. And you can get away with all kinds of shit in the city of London proper, which is exactly where they were at. Their actual registration was in Luxembourg, which again is a very well-known money laundering haven for registration of these types of banks. And so, again, sold as a Pakistani bank, and in basically, other than them having a branch there and the original name coming from Pakistan, it is not in any way a Pakistani bank. And they grew to, in a very short period of time, to be a $20 billion a year bank. And they had no automation, any tracking. They were one of those fake banks that lent out all of this money non-collateralized. So when they folded, and they used it in the meantime to weapons traffic, drug traffic and human traffic. And then when they folded, there was no way to recoup people who had actually thought it was a real bank and bank there. And in the meantime, they had created banks at every location around the world notorious for money laundering, drug trafficking, and weapons trafficking, and used this. And one of the requirements of that bank was if you did business with the CIA, like Noriega, Bush, Senior, Saddam Hussein, Bin Laden, Aiden Khashoggi, you had to have an account there. And there was an account there for all of those people because that's how they money laundered.
Good summary. And we got a Bonesman who went to school with George Bush and Buckley and a few others, and he's the guy overseeing the agency that regulates that.
And then when they investigate that agency that's regulating it, it's another Bonesman.
Yeah. And these people, this is not a coincidence that these people keep showing up in these positions. It just can't be. The connections are just too frequent. So he's still acting as the comptroller of the currency, but he also gets named a vice president of what's called the U.S. Export-Import Bank in 1981 by Reagan. And we're going to spend some time on EXIM, is what it's called, Export-Import Bank. It's not talked about a whole lot, but it should be. Colonel's got a pretty good working knowledge of what it is, but I'm going to go into some more detail here because I think it matters, and you'll see why shortly. EXIM's founded in 1935 under FDR. Basically to push U.S. exports overseas. They give loans. In 1945, right after World War II, it becomes an independent agency within the executive branch, and that timing gets interesting. What they did is they facilitate U.S. exports of goods and services, basically to give loan guarantees for companies to buy U.S. goods. Their very first transaction is a $3.8 million loan to Cuba in 1935 for the purchase of silver ingots. Interesting place to start your business. They would finance what was known as the Pan American Highway. And that's the highway that went all the way from Alaska down to Chile. Colonel, why would a shady government organization want to be building roads in South America?
Road initiative, right?
Can you repeat that? I think your mic. Sorry, your mic's going in and out.
It was fine when we did it, though.
Yes. They also constructed the Burma Road in 1937 to 38, which linked China to Burma.
For drug trafficking.
Yes, for the opium trafficking from the Green Gang.
Yes.
Yeah, that was U.S. taxpayer money that was financing the facilitation of the road that made that easier. That's EXIM for you. They were also the first one to give credit to the post-Soviet European nations after the fall of the Berlin Wall. They've had a number of scandals. Yeah, and that's important, the Eastern European lending, because when the Berlin Wall fell, what happened was a huge Western land grab of resources in Eastern Europe and Russia.
That's what I was going to say. Yes. Yeah, talk about that for a second, because that's the huge part. This is the quote unquote privatization where all of the oligarchs in the United States in the West runs in and buys up all of the shit.
Yep. And they're buying up all the shit. They're being financed, or loans are being backed by EXIM.
Yes, us.
Yes, our government.
They're not putting any of their own money at risk. They're using our money to make themselves rich.
Mm-hmm. That's basically the scandal. This is mercantilism at its finest. Anyone who watches me, I talk about mercantilism ad nauseum. It's when the government is in bed with, a cartel of closely held businesses, and they use the government for their own benefit. And it's crony capitalism. It's also known as fascism.
I was going to say, or fascism, for those of that are my followers to understand that Fascism International is where the end goal is. And what's important about this is I just want to run through a real quick example of this process, because this just came up in the news. This is just the timing is a godsend always. So in countries like Bulgaria, that was known as the weapons trafficking haven for Operation Gladio, in Romania, Hungary, Poland, all of these, they the West went in with the upgrading of electrification, the railroads, every utility that you can think of, the telephone. Sweden was big in the telephone industry. And so they would go in and buy up the infrastructure under the quote unquote privatization, and they would use puppet oligarchs in these locations to make it look like it wasn't the West. It was, some lucky son of a gun that happened to have lived under communism that all of a sudden now has all of this money and can be a new oligarch in this. And it's the same thing that they were doing in Latin America, where they go in and they find this corrupt elite, and then that corrupt elite acts as the plantation overseers. But one of the people that did that in Russia was the Hermitage Company with Browdard and Edmund Safra. And do you remember that story of, okay, did you know that the nurse, quote unquote nurse, special forces guy that set Safra's house on fire, which is how Safra was murdered, just got sentenced for hiring a hitman to kill his wife out in California? But his wife was a doctor. Now, how in the hell did a guy that went to prison for basically killing him through what they called was like, negligent homicide or whatever, so he only spent like 10 or 12 years in prison, how's he marry a doctor?
You got me.
Okay, keep going.
But, well, let's see. We're hitting on really what the big picture is here, because not only, do we have the Ex-Im Bank making those loans to these businesses, but in all these different countries. At the same time, every single trade deal which you have to sign to be part of the Anglo-American rules-based order comes attached with, we've talked about this, these ISDS, investor state dispute settlements. So this company gets free government money to go exploit resources, and if the government decides to take back the resources, they will sue them in an international bank with ISDS and likely recoup all of their money, which wasn't even theirs in the first place. And it's recouped based on expected profits that were lost.
Correct.
So that is the giant scheme. And and when the government fights back, what do? It's regime change. That's when we start to send the USAID in there, Soros organizations, Operation Gladio. And next thing you know, we've got a quote unquote coup.
Correct.
This is the game right here. And Ex-Im is one of the very first parts of how the game is played.
Yep.
So, have we hammered that point home that Ex-Im really is part of the whole scheme?
Yes, we have.
Let's talk about some of their scandals.
Okay.
Forbes magazine, one of the better periodicals in finance sometimes, criticized the whole Ex-Im thing for being corporate welfare. And the quote I got was, "It exists only to offer business a better credit deal than the free market would have."
But only to certain people.
Oh, yeah, you got to be connected. Okay, and certain people, ready for this? Boeing is one of those people. During a certain time period, 65% of all Ex-Im loans went to companies or countries that were buying Boeing aircraft, and they would artificially inflate the prices of new airplanes. So, yeah, that's certain people. Boeing is one of them. Military industrial complex, one of the biggest defense contractors. Of course, they're one of the favored companies. Enron got a whole bunch of Ex-Im loans. Believe it or not.
Oh, I definitely believe that.
Yeah, the Cowboys. And of course, everyone knows Cowboys and Yankees are the basically the two major factions that run our foreign policy and intel agencies. When I say Cowboys and Yankees, Yankees are the Eastern establishment that we talk about, the old original robber barons, and the Cowboys are the oil and defense barons of the 20th century, the new robber barons. There's something called Operation Car Wash. Are you familiar?
No.
Okay. Happened in 2014. It was a Brazilian corruption investigation. The investigation came out of Brazil, and this is one of the reasons that Bolsonaro got into power in 2018 in the first place, is because they fall out from all the corruption on this. What was going on is Petrobras was taking all these loans, and they had a bunch of construction companies that would inflate their costs for oil-related projects. And there was over $10 billion in bribes to companies like a construction company called Odebrecht. Major scandal, took down a huge political party in Brazil, and an awful lot of people went to jail for that one. That was all from the Export-Import Bank.
Now, I'm familiar with that scandal. I just didn't know what the name of that was. And I didn't know that that was the original financing was from the import-export.
Yeah, they call it Operation Car Wash because the investigation started. They noticed some shady things on the books of a couple of car washes in Brazil. And from there, the guy who owned the car washes started talking. And they were able to trace it all the way back to its origin. It was a really good piece of prosecution. So interesting how you just started some small little car wash and you take down major corporations. They were involved in there was a China National Nuclear Power Corporation. A lot of people were calling for shutting down Exim because we were basically paying for China to build their nuclear program and also paying companies to make us shut down nuclear power and go green. So think about that with the whole climate change scandal. I think that's kind of a big deal.
Well, it just illustrates the fraud of the entire concept of climate change. It was just a money laundering opportunity.
Yeah, it always has been. And it's also a Hegelian way of implementing a manufactured crisis so they can implement more power.
Correct.
They'd never waste that opportunity. Another fun scandal is a company called Abengoa. Now, this is a Spanish green energy company that got about $33 million in loans. The only problem with that is one of Abengoa's board members was a guy by the name of Bill Richardson, who was the former governor of Export-Import Bank. So a little bit of self-dealing. They also were caught up in lending money to Solyndra, one of the biggest boondoggles in green energy history.
Money laundering.
Yes. And then, of course, they're involved currently recently in Mozambique with LNG, liquid natural gas controversy. Exim had sent $4.7 billion for an LNG project in Mozambique to a company called Total Energies. And that is linked to the Palma massacre. Total Energies just basically just walked away and let all their people get massacred during the Mozambique troubles. I think
That's crazy. Okay, hold on. I just wanted to read Jonathan's comment. It says, my college bestie went to Russia for his fortune under Gorbachev, then helped Yeltsin and ended up with helping Browder draft the Magnitsky Act, which was the law after Browder got caught in Magnitsky, who was the guy helping him steal and arrange deals for the privatization of Russian shit. He got killed. Magnitsky got killed. So Browder gets kicked out of Russia because he gets discovered as trying to basically front Russian oligarchs, but yet have Western buyers behind it during their privatization. He said he's now in London scheming to steal Russia's treasure because he missed the first time.
Yeah, that's accurate. Moscow on the Thames River. And Putin kicked a lot of the oligarchs out.
Yeah.
Which is why he's not popular in some places. Let's go a little deeper into XM. We've got time for this. So don't believe me. Let's look at their own words. If you can pull that up on screen. This is from congress.gov, official document, and they explain Exim Bank, the official U.S. government export credit agency, has a mission to support U.S. jobs by financing and facilitating U.S. goods and services exports. Sounds pretty innocent. Operating under a renewable general statutory charter, as amended, blah, 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 it aims to support U.S. exports when the private sector is unwilling or unable to provide financing, or when U.S. exports compete overseas against exports from other countries backed by foreign ECAs, export credit agencies. What they just said there, we're going to find a way to finance your project even if the market thinks it's a terrible idea. Correct. Because it's politically convenient. They're also saying we want to fight back against other governments that are putting their finger on the scales of free trade, which is fair enough. We should fight back. We actually should just eliminate it altogether if we wanted a truly capitalist system. Go down here a little bit, and they look at this is from 2022, and I can't blow it up any more than this. It If you look on the right-hand side, outside of the OECD companies, Italy got 14.8 billion. So 67.4 billion went to OECD, arranged its Organization of Economic Country Development or something like that. Outside of the OECD, we gave $11 billion in loans to Chinese companies and 10.4 billion in India, which is pretty ridiculous. That's where our taxpayer dollars are going, people.
So I thought China was an existential threat.
We'll get more to Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about more of that when we get to some of the other people today.
Yeah.
There's a really good, this is the Government Accountability Office. They've got a whole bunch of reports. Just the Export-Import Bank monitoring of exports with dual military and civilian uses as of 2024. So they will finance, quote unquote, dual use military projects all over the world. But it's got to have a civilian use, otherwise it can't be pure military, which basically means it can be anything. So I thought that was worth it.
We're still facilitating military improvements to people that could end up being our enemies.
Yeah. And there's a mountain of information here in these reports. So that's worth looking at. If you guys want to go to GAO, look up Export-Import Bank. There's a bunch of reports. Last thing I have on this is they released their 2022 competitiveness report. And the last thing I wanted to see here is the continued emphasis across the ECA world on climate and sustainability related finance. People, we're not playing on a level playing field. We have governments around the world that are financing these green projects using your taxpayer dollars. The cat is out of the bag. We've got a long way to catch up and unwind all this stuff, but that was worth showing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the Ex-Im Bank, and that is what Mr. Lord, was the third I said? Charles Edwin Lord II. Well, that's what he's doing at a really interesting time. All right. He then goes back into private life and becomes the chairman and chief executive of Prudential Bank and Trust Company, big company. And then he becomes a senior advisor for an investment banking company that you have mentioned recently called Dillon Read and Company.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about Dillon Read real quick and jump in with some of the stuff you know.
Well, can I just touch on the fact that he spent time at an insurance company is equally important, because the insurance company sits on hundreds of billions of dollars for investments.
Yeah. Dillon Read. Yeah, Dillon Read, founded 1832, notable for selling war bonds during the War of Northern Aggression, also known some places as Civil War. They were the firm in 1921 that rescued a company called Goodyear Tire and Rubber. Any coincidences?
None.
They engineered the buyout of Dodge by Chrysler in 1928. They underwrote foreign bonds and arranged financing for the petroleum industry. Now we got the Rockefellers. Yeah, now the Rockefellers come into play. Post-World War I, they became the largest lender to Germany for reconstruction, including funding IG Farben and Verninkt Stahlwerk, which was a steelwork company. They basically helped finance the Nazi Germany, alongside Brown Brothers Harriman, the other bank that was putting a lot of money into Germany, also with Skull and Bones roots neck deep. This is Dillon Read Company, who this Bonesman, Lord II, went to work for after working for the Export-Import Bank.
And they did it using people like Prescott Bush.
Yes, absolutely.
Who was he? Have we talked about him before?
Oh, we just did a whole show on the whole Bush lineage.
Yeah.
All their Skull and Bones ties.
Yeah.
That's just a coincidence.
Okay.
Okay, so a guy by the name of D. Douglas Dillon, one of the founder's sons, he was the chairman for the company for a while, and he became the Undersecretary of State and U.S. Ambassador to France under Eisenhower, and he also became the Treasury Secretary under JFK. Why is an investment banker running the State Department?
Because they worked hand in hand with the CIA for the international syndicate, which is full of bankers.
Bingo. Dillon Reed had another chairman, a guy by the name of Nicholas Brady, who was the chairman of Dillon Reed from 1980 to 92. And he'd become the Secretary of Treasurer under both Reagan and Bush.
Yeah, that's not a surprise.
Well, it's a real small circle. Dillon Reed would get sold to the Travelers Companies in 1986. That's another insurance company.
Ooh, and they come up in some Gladio stuff too. So keep going.
Yeah. Travelers also has a big connection to Citibank, which is interesting. One of my former employers. The company would then be sold to S.G. Warburg and Company to form a company called Warburg, Dillon, and Reed in 1997. And yes, that's the same Warburg family that was there on Jekyll Island that founded the Federal Reserve, the same Warburg who had close ties to the Rothschilds in Germany. That's the same Warburg family. And this is in 1997. I've done business with Warburg, Dillon, Reed myself. They were, they had a lot of offerings that we looked at. It would then become part of UBS in 1998, 2 years before UBS bought my company, Payne Weber. So I was working with the company that owned these guys. And then UBS would close down the Warburg Dillon Reed section because they lost about $40 billion on subprime mortgages. So that was the end of Dillon Reed. But that's where this guy went to work. So kind of an interesting little story there. He would then end his career at a firm called Lord and Associates. It's a law firm. This is the Lord family coming in here. It's founded by Daniel Lord in 1845. Daniel Lord is interesting. He's born in 1795 in a place called 1795. We're going back that far, in a place called Stonington, Connecticut. And he would graduate from Yale in 1814. Wasn't a Bonesman because there were no bones for another 20 years. This law firm was a big blue chip New York law firm. One of their biggest clients was a guy by the name of John Jacob Astor. Yeah. Most of their clients are from some interesting industries: coffee, sugar importation. I'll leave that to hang in there for a second. Cocoa exchange. They represented Merrill Lynch, British Airways, and my favorite is they were the law firm for the New York Times. And two of their law firm alumni, a guy named Lewis Loeb, another guy by the name of Goodale, they were both the general counsel for the New York Times.
Wow, that's quite a resume there.
Yeah. And a lot of connections. When I paused on sugar, well, why is that so important? And cocoa and coffee. Well, these are all Latin American imports. And that led to Gladio, coups. Yes. And they're represented by a law firm whose son ends up working for the Export-Import Bank. So this is
the money that facilitated United Fruit in their expansion and takeover of basically all the farmland in Latin America.
Yeah, it's a family business. Apparently, corruption is.
Holy shit!
Uh-huh. Yeah, I thought you'd see that. This episode really ties a lot of things together.
It does.
Uh-huh. Well, talking about ties, Daniel Lord, the founder of the bank, his son, a guy named James Cooper Lord, and he married someone named Margaretta Hunter Brown. Yeah, she's the daughter of Brown Brothers. She's the daughter of Brown Brothers Harriman, one of their founders, James Brown, the one who wasn't a Bonesman, but.
Holy crap!
It is a family business. All right, you seen enough of Charles Edwin Lord II?
Yes.
Yeah. Speaking of family, he's got a cousin. Second cousin by the name of Winston Lord. Winston Lord is a Bonesman, class of 1959, 10 years later. But because we're on the Lords, I decided to jump ahead. So Winston Lord, we got a picture of Winston.
Okay.
I got to share that one with you because some people may be familiar with the face. And where are you, Winston? There you are.
I don't see it yet. Okay, there it is.
That is Mr. Winston Lord. That's pretty good. That's pretty recent. Why do we know him? Well, I'm going to tell you. Thanks for asking. All right, so Winston Lord was born in New York City in 1937. He is the son of a gentleman by the name of Oswald Bates Lord. Oswald Bates was a textile executive for a company called Gailey and Lord. That's a company that would end up being purchased by Burlington Industries. Yes, we've heard Burlington before. That's the same company that owned Burlington Railroad, that Burnham, who we talked about 3 weeks ago, who refused to sell it to the Harriman Railroads. So that's the same company. That's where his father came from. His mother is interesting. Her name was Mary Pillsbury Lord. And you're going to ask, is she related to the Pillsburys? And what do you think the answer is?
I was actually going to ask if she's related to the Pillsbury Doughboy, but same thing.
Well, she is, because her grandfather was the founder of the Pillsbury Company named Charles Alfred Pillsbury. But she was more than just an heiress, because she became a civic activist and a political ally of none other than Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they met while she was visiting Europe as the chairman of the Civilian Advisory Committee of the Women's Army Corps.
Well, of course they did.
Yeah. So she actually was one of the... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just looking over her, president of the International Rescue Committee, which is another front that it was used by the CIA occasionally to pretend like the rescue workers to gather intelligence. Also, the UN Human Rights Commission.
That's the one. That's the one I'm focused on, because that's the Human Rights Commission. It's a big one.
Wow. Okay, go ahead.
That's crazy. That's Winston's mother.
Wow.
Should have grabbed a picture of her. I blew that one. All right, so back to Winston. Interesting parents, and of course, he's distant relatives. The Lord family's pretty big, obviously. He attends, his private school was the Buckley School. Of course it was.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Uh-huh. All right, so after Yale, he goes into law and diplomacy at Tufts University. And we need to talk about Tufts, because it is one of those schools that is a pipeline to certain, shall we say, organizations. Tufts has long been known for having an exchange program with the IDF. Yeah, you heard that right. I grabbed some key Tufts alumni. How about Daniel Moynihan, who we've talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Scott Brown, former Massachusetts congressman.
Really?
Yeah, these are Tufts. How about Anthony Scaramucci?
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
How about 2 CEOs of DuPont?
And DuPont is huge in this whole international syndicate scheme of things.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Now, would you be shocked if I told you that's where Jamie Dimon went to school?
I would not.
Well, he did. Gal by the name of Laura Lang. The only reason I brought her up because she was the CEO of Time Magazine, or Time Incorporated.
Which is a CIA front.
Which was founded by a Bonesman.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. How about Thomas Pickering?
Oh, what?
Yep, UN ambassador from 89 to 92. That Pickering.
Oh, no way. Okay, because his name has come up a whole bunch of times. Holy crap. Okay, let me just look real quick. Keep going. I may have to come back to him for a second.
I got one last one, and no one better than Eye Patch McCain himself, Dan Crenshaw, went to Tufts.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's definitely a mic drop.
Yeah, thought so.
Okay, so here's just a couple of things about Pickering. State Department political affairs, ambassador to Russia in the 90s, right after the wall falls. So he's overseeing the rampage of Western capitalists in there, feeding off the bones of the roadkill. Ambassador to India, ambassador to the UN, over 92 when we invade, over 91 when we invade Iraq, ambassador to Italy, or to Israel, sorry, 85 to 88. And what were we doing in 85 to 88? Israel is trafficking weapons to Angola and to Iran for Ronald Reagan, for the Iran-Contra. This guy's overseeing that. He oversaw the invasion of Iraq. Oh, and look at this. He's the ambassador in 83 to 85 to El Salvador, where we're setting up death squads and sending people to Taiwan to their political warfare cadre academy. Oh, and then he ends up in Nigeria, where we've just totally destroyed that country too. Probably one of the most, so he was the Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, which goes back to your Bonesmen starting with the climate bullshit back in that same time frame.
Bingo.
Jordan, 74 to 78. Yeah, I've come across this guy's name a whole bunch of times, and he is involved in so much shit it's not even funny. Okay, I'm done off my soapbox. Go ahead.
No, I told the Colonel before we jumped on the air that I was going to tee her up for a couple of really easy home runs. Yeah, Pickering was one of those. And that's Tufts. That's Tufts University. We could spend a lot more time into the background of Tufts, but that's not the focus of this episode. So, but I'd leave it out there. There's definitely something there to be seen. All right, so that's where Winston Lord went to college. He gets into diplomacy, and he played a key role in the restoration. This guy is a big deal, Winston Lord. He played a key role in the restoration of relations between the U.S. and China, and it has ever since. From 69 to 73, he was on the National Security Planning staff, and he was a special assistant to none other than National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger. It's a Bonesman. He accompanied Kissinger on a secret trip to Beijing in 1971 that opened up China. This guy was there. He would also accompany Gerald Ford on his China visit in 75, and he was in every single meeting between Nixon, Ford, and Kissinger when they met with Mao Zedong, Zhou Enlai, and Deng Xiaoping during the 70s. He was at every single meeting. He was the top assistant to Kissinger in every single meeting with North Vietnam from 70 to 73. So he probably doesn't know any secrets at all.
Yeah.
He's that book, Superclass, that I talk about, where they talk about 6,000 families that rule the world. He's mentioned in there. The Lords are one of those families. He becomes the State Department's policy planning and top policy advisor on China from 1973 to 1977. You know who else is over in China at that exact same time period being the gatekeeper for businesses trying to do business in China? None other than George Bush.
Oh,
and
that's
his brother. Right. Yeah. Bonesman, by the way, in case we forgot. Then he becomes the U.S. ambassador to China from 1985 to 89 under Reagan. Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs under Clinton from 93 to 97. So what is it we say? It doesn't matter who wins the presidency. Our foreign policy never changes. Doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat, because the foreign policy establishment doesn't care. They're going to do what they want anyway. This is a great example of that. So he's an ambassador under both Clinton and Bush and Reagan. I think this guy hammers that point home really well.
Yep, I agree.
Shoot, I used an abbreviation. I don't remember what it stands for, so I'm going to have to skip over that. He had, between government posts, he had an important job. The president of something called DVR, and I'm trying to remember what that stands for.
GGR?
DVR.
Oh, DVR.
I got to find that real quick. Make some commentary because I do want to find that.
Well, I just want to mention that although the Tibet, so I have to point out when we talk about China every single time that during their entire existence, during this time, they're being ignored by the United States. That's not even existing because we recognize Taiwan as the president, Chiang Kai-shek at the time, as the president of China proper as a government in exile. And so the negotiations that are going on right now with actual mainland China is so significant because we've just spent the last 35 years ignoring them as if they don't even exist, but not ignoring them completely. We've actually been attacking them. And they know it's us. And we did it through the Tibetan program where we brought Tibetans into Colorado, trained them as stay-behind assassins to attack China from within. We did it with the Uyghurs. We took the Uyghurs and put them up into the stands in terrorist training camps and then brought them back into China after we had done the Tibetan one in order to continue those attacks after we got discovered doing it in Tibet. Meanwhile, Taiwan is attacking them along their southeast border where they have not one island called Taiwan. They have like 7 or 8 along that area where they were launching attacks constantly into mainland China as these people are going over trying to explain to China that we're the good guys.
Fun stuff. So his next gig becomes the chairman for the National Endowment for Democracy.
Oh my gosh.
CIA cutout. Told you that's, of course, he's also, yeah, this guy gets around. He's also been the chairman of the Carnegie Endowment National Commission on America and the New World. So
which is the whole fascist international how we're going to get there committee.
It's a New World Order.
Mm-hmm.
Friendly reminder that the Bonesmen call themselves the Order. Friendly reminder that it was on September 11th, 1991, 10 years before the real 9/11, that George Bush gave his New World Order speech. 10 years to the day.
Yes.
It's always been an interesting coincidence to me.
Coincidence.
Yeah. He was a trustee on the Trilateral Commission. Yeah. Trilateral Commission is one of the major organizations like the Council of Foreign Relations, the Atlantic Council, that basically sets foreign policy. He's there. He's one of the trustees. Would you be shocked if I told you he was a former steering member of the Bilderberg Group?
No.
Well, he was. And as someone mentioned on X earlier today, he is a distinguished fellow at the Aspen Institute.
Oh, of course he is.
Uh-huh. You want to tell everyone what the Aspen Institute is?
Well, from my perspective, it's just another CIA coordination organization. But so what I have discovered is kind of, and people ask, what's the difference between the CFR, the Trilateral, the Bilderbergs, the Aspen Institute? So what you find is people like Lord obviously is one of the consistencies among the different ones, but you couldn't have, there's too many of them. As Warhamster talks about the 6,000 families, there's too many to have all at one venue. And so they kind of divide themselves into these different venues and they specialize around a particular thing, whether it's oil policy, but you have to have consistency among them because you can't have too many coups going on at one time, and you can't have us supporting one faction, like the Angola one, for example, where we didn't want the LM in whatever that one is. That was the right one to have in there. We wanted UNITA, but there was also another one. You can't have two different foundations funding mercenaries for two different. So these are deconfliction committees on the New World Order. And they just have different focuses, but they're all going down the same road at the same speed.
(1977 to 1985). His job was as the president of something known as the Council of Foreign Relations.
The mother of them all
Mm-hmm.
for the U.S.
Yeah, he's not just on it; he's the president of it,
which is the role that Rockefeller played.
Exactly. Currently, as of right this minute, because this guy's alive and still acting, he's the director of the U.S. Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. That's how he's spending his retirement years.
In North Korea?
Well, U.S. Committee for Human Rights, which basically is a spook job.
Right.
The last we hear of Mr. Lord, since we beat him up pretty good, was in 2020. He was one of 130 former Republican national security officials who signed a letter saying that Trump was unfit for another term.
Of course he did, because he is a threat to this very apparatus this guy has wallowed in, this pig trough, for, as long as his family's been involved in it.
Yep. And Trump's a threat to that. And what do we say? There's only been 3 exceptions to the presidents that can't be controlled, and those were JFK, Carter, and Trump.
Well, interestingly enough, are you going to talk about his wife?
I was not.
She's Chinese.
Oh, you know what? I did see that. I saw her name, her maiden name, and I thought that had to have a Chinese connection. I didn't bother putting it in my notes.
Yes. But right now, that's critically important, because what you're finding out is, like in this whole Signalgate thing, there's Chinese people involved in that. They seem to be intricately woven into the fabric of so many different things, and we don't even pay attention to that. Because the first time I noticed this is Claire Chennault, who was the Flying Tigers, intimately involved in setting up this entire Operation Gladio drug trafficking network. China lobbied, World Anti-Communist League. I mean, at the very heart of Operation Gladio, his wife was Chinese too.
Well, you bring up a point that I've been hammering home for months or even longer. Every time I talk about that 1971 period where we opened up China, well, this guy was there. Rockefeller started this whole green thing. They started the Trilateral Commission. We started the World Economic Forum. All these things are interrelated as part of the move towards the one world government. This is the Great Reset crowd. They've written about it. They've told us.
What a hamster, you're never going to even believe this. I just clicked on her sister. Her sister's name is Kathy Boa Bean. Bean was born in Guilin, China, to parents Sandy and Dora Boa. Her father represented the Republic of China at the International Sugar Council of the UN. And he also served as the vice president of Taiwan Sugar Corporation. So she's part of the Chinese that moved to Taiwan as part of Chiang Kai-shek setting up Taiwan.
Makes perfect sense.
Which means her father was associated with the drug trafficking of Chiang Kai-shek and the KMT army.
Beautiful connection.
Holy crap.
Winston Lord, people. And he's still going today.
And it's the names that you've never heard of before that's behind so much of this shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're every bit as intricately involved as someone like Bush.
Yes, but I would say more so with this guy.
We have time for another segment. Can you go another 30 minutes today?
Yeah.
Okay, so I got another good family to take a look at if we get a segue.
Okay.
All right, the guy we're going to talk about is none other than William Henry Draper III. And yes, I've got a picture of Henry because if you watch CNBC and things like that, you may have seen this guy's face.
I'm waiting for it to come across.
Yeah, here he is.
Oh, yeah. Definitely have seen him.
Okay. Question is, do we know why he should be familiar to us? Thanks for asking, Warhamster. Yeah, he's a Bonesman class of 1950, which means he was a direct classmate of William F. Buckley and 2 years behind George H.W. Bush. So he knows these people. He is born in 1928 in White Plains, New York. He's the son of William Henry Draper Jr. That's why he's the third. I'll show you William Draper Jr. because we're going to talk about him first.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I knew his name. I'll let you go ahead and talk about it, but holy crap.
You want to show the people Draper II? Draper Jr.? All right. Nothing too exciting there. But what's he all about? Well, he's born in 1894 in Harlem, New York. He got his BA and his MA from New York University. 1919 to 1921, he works for National City Bank, which of course became Citibank. Worked for Bankers Trust from 1923 to 27. And he goes to work for an investment bank called Dillon Reed. Yeah, and he was actually the VP of Dillon Reed in 1937.
Wow.
Draper Jr., William Henry Draper Jr., had served as an infantry major in World War I, and he stayed in what's called the Organized Reserve. He was the chief of staff for the 77th Division from 1936 to 1940. So, do you want to go into detail about how the reserves worked back then, or can we just keep going?
Well, no, it's not of note, especially necessarily during that time. Obviously, we didn't have a standing military. So these are the foundations that were transitioned and the leadership as we transitioned into a war footing. The reserves were not that they're not significant today, they're very significant, but they were even more significant back then because we didn't have a standing military. They were the trained and ready that were activated and then trained the people we got off the street.
Yeah, do you find it all interesting that an investment banker for Dillon Reed is one of the highest ranking members of the reserve?
Not when you look at the international syndicate, I'm not, because they want to be able to craft the people and be able to subterfuge, because all wars are bankers' wars, right?
Bingo.
Why would you not have them there?
All right, so that's up to 1940. What happens? World War II's creeping up on us. He gets invited by none other than George Marshall to serve on the President's Advisory Committee for the Selective Service. So he's DC brass, moves to DC. Start of World War II, he takes command of the 136th Infantry, 33rd Division of the National Guard. By the end of World War II, he's promoted to be a brigadier general. He gets posted to Berlin, of all places, at the end of World War II. In his job is to serve as the Chief of Economics Division under Allied Controlled Council for Germany, 1945 to 1947. What the heck's going on in Berlin in 1945 to 1947, Colonel?
We are building Operation Gladio under the auspices of restoring Germany or Europe in general.
Yeah, Operation Paperclips going on, all that is, and he's there, an investment banker.
I find it interesting that they call it Allied Control Council, because ACC is the same name of the committee within NATO, and I know that's where you're going, that ends up overseeing Operation Gladio. Only its acronym was Allied Clandestine Committee. I'm sure that's another coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all coincidences.
Allied Control Council.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So one of the things he did, he was known for opposing the Morgenthau Plan, the one that would have prevented German economic resurgence. He wanted to put money back into Germany. He was known for that. He becomes the Undersecretary of War in 1947. He was known as the Wall Street General. That's what the media called him. He would then go on and rejoin Dillon Reed Investment Banking, one we just talked about, in 1949. He then becomes the very first United States ambassador to NATO.
And that is critical because this is the time when they have hired Reinhard Gehlen as the NATO stay behind with Alan Dulles brainiacs. The Gehlen organization ends up being the German BND, which is the equivalent of the CIA, and Konrad Adenauer, who is the chancellor of Germany. All of this stuff is going on, and this guy is at the foundation of NATO and this new mission that they're going to take on.
And he's an investment banker for Dillon Reed.
Because Operation Gladio is going to be their paramilitary force around the world that allows them to open up new markets. It makes perfect sense.
Yep. So 1959 we get to, and he becomes the founder of a firm called Draper, Geither, and Anderson. And I want to spend a second on that because I had this in my notes from way back. When I was putting together notes for talking about the foundations and their power and influence with Norman Dodd, when he did that homework, he mentions a guy by the name of Horace Rowan Gaither. That's the partner in Draper Gaither. Horace Rowan Gaither was the administrator of the Ford Foundation. He was a World War II assistant director of the radiation laboratory at MIT. And in 1948, he helped fund something known as the Rand Corporation. Yeah, we just talked about the Rand Corporation, bunch of skull and bones connections.
Well,
and he would be
CIA front.
Yeah, well, there you have it. Horace was also the first chairman of the MITRE Corporation Board of Trustees.
Another CIA front. I know plenty of people that work at MITRE.
Mm-hmm. And he wrote what's called the Geither Report on the vulnerability of U.S. defense, and he talked to Norman Dodd, who's a hero, that he told him that he was part of the OSS and was getting White House directives to use the Ford Foundation's grant-making power to alter life in the U.S. so that it could be comfortably merged with that of the USSR. That's the guy that Draper went into business with.
That's crazy.
Uh-huh. So then he retires. And, of course, nice normal retirement. All he does is become the U.S. delegate to the United Nations Population Commission and co-founded the Population Crisis Committee in 1965.
So we can start killing people.
Yeah. When they say Population Commission, you're talking about Malthusian depopulation. That's all that means.
That's crazy.
One other side note on him is he had chaired something called the Draper Committee.
So wait a minute.
Yeah.
You're telling me the guy that was the first ambassador to NATO that set up Operation Gladio, that's responsible for overthrowing over 90 governments and killing millions of people, was in a depopulation position?
It's probably just a hobby for him.
Okay. All right.
One little mic drop on Draper before we go to his son. He's asked to chair something called a Draper Committee, named after him, where they were studying the military aspects of the 1949 Mutual Defense Treaty. or I'm sorry, the Mutual Defense Assistance Act, which is a kind of a companion to NATO. That's important because one of the members on his committee, John J. McCloy.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical.
Yeah, so that's dear old dad, William Henry Draper Jr. His son, William Henry Draper III, the Bonesman. Gee, I wonder how he got into Yale and was thought to be a good Bonesman candidate. Daddy's connections. He would graduate Yale and go to Harvard Business School, not law school. Henry Draper III is well known in my industry. He was very big in venture capital. And part of that is he studied at Harvard under a guy by the name of Professor Georges Doriot. Doriot's considered the father of venture capital. He's the one that created the whole industry. Draper III would marry a woman named Phyllis Culbertson. Her father, of course, is William Howard Culbertson, who was the former chairman of Merrill Lynch International. Another big, yeah. So William Henry Draper III goes to school for a company called Inland Steel Company.
Hold on. You just talked about his wife, Culbertson.
Yeah.
She is the daughter of Richard Ullman from Buffalo, New York, home of OSS William Donovan.
They're related?
No, I'm just saying the connection for me is there's so many of these people that are from Buffalo. Buffalo is like this misunderstood kind of haven of these people that grow up just like the whole Skull and Bones. There's a lot of people that originally were from these very extremely wealthy families in Buffalo that I didn't even know Buffalo produced these things. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Cincinnati connection that keeps coming up.
Yes.
Yeah. So he goes to work for a company called Inland Steel Company from 54 to 59. That's important to know who Inland is because they made all of their money supplying steel for the U.S. government in World War I and II. They are a war profiteer. Probably legitimate business, but war was good business for them.
Which is why they would want more war.
Uh-huh. So he leaves there in 59 to go work for his father's company, Draper, Gaither and Anderson, who I just mentioned, which became the very first venture capital firm on the West Coast. We've always talked about how all this stuff is Eastern Seaboard, and all of a sudden, right around this time period of late 50s, early 60s, they did a jump across the country into the Bay Area. Well, these guys were there. These were the Drapers were part of that. He would leave his father's firm in 62 to form his own company, Draper & Johnson, and then in 65 he founds a company called Sutter Hill Ventures, which is still one of the top VC firms in the country to this day. This guy is loaded, Draper III. They financed a number of companies, like hundreds actually they did, but LSA Logic is the big one. Banyan Systems, Restoration Robotics, Molecular Templates. It's the whole who's who of good startup companies, all from the Bay Area. Fast forward to 1981, Ronald Reagan's president, and he decides to name Draper III as the chairman of a entity known as the Export-Import Bank. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Why do we have to have a bonesman in the bottleneck positions of all these different entities that are right there at the crux of our foreign policy? No, here we have another one.
Policy is about the international syndicate and not the United States.
We're just going to keep hammering that point home because it's true.
Yes.
86, he leaves that position, and he becomes the head of the United Nations Development Program. Anytime you see development, you know what's going on. Because
that's what USAID is.
Bingo.
This is the UN version of USAID.
Exactly.
You don't know.
Yeah, it makes him the number 2 U.S. Diplomat at the United Nations. While he's there, they oversaw, ready for this, over 10,000 international aid projects. I don't even want to go into the list of what those aid projects are, but you can just guess. This is 1986. all over the world. We're doing foreign aid, which obviously is a front for a lot of other things more often than not.
Correct.
Okay, 2002, he co-founded something called the Draper Richards Foundation. Now we're getting into the foundations. Okay.
They all have to have them.
Yeah. Well, one of the co-founders is a guy by the name of Robert Kaplan. And you should know that name because he was a former vice chair of Goldman Sachs and also the CEO of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They were into something called venture philanthropy. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's like what the Gates Foundation does. You act like you're doing something for philanthropic purposes under the guise of making money. And you get all kinds of tax breaks because it's a charitable, nonprofit, what have you. That's what these guys are doing, venture philanthropy. And it is the dirtiest business in the world. When we get into the foundations, we're going to rip this stuff apart. So this is a little prelude to that. How did he finish his career? Well, he's on the advisory council for World Rehabilitation Fund in New York, and he sits on the board of a graduate school of business at no place other than Stanford University.
Yay, go Stanford.
Yeah. Why is Stanford important? Why is that the mic drop? It is a huge recruiting ground for the CIA.
Correct.
Well, that's all I've got. That's all I've got for today.
I like the fact that it says here that his current DRK portfolio includes U.S. and internationally helping to provide critical access to healthcare, education, legal resources, economic empowerment, which means economic empowerment for them, food security, and social justice.
And you want to know where this woke stuff came from?
And he's a member of the CFR.
Yep. I mean, did we hit every single one of those agencies today? We got CFR, we got Atlantic Council, we got them all today.
Yeah, pretty much. We got them all.
So I will ask my redundant question. Is there more to Skull and Bones that meets the eye?
I think we've completely proven that point, that there is much more to Skull and Bones, and that it seems to be an incubator for the international syndicate controllers. That's my premise.
Yeah, without a doubt. We got a couple other names we're going to get to, just go quickly through in the 50s and 60s. And then we've got a couple of real big names we might be able to finish up next week. But if I go quickly through the less important names, I'll let you know. But next week may be our final episode.
Okay.
Well, no, it can't be because we've got 3 more huge names.
Okay.
So, yeah. So
at least a couple more weeks.
Yeah, probably 2 more weeks for this series, I think.
Okay. Well,
any closing thoughts?
No, I think this has been instrumental in pulling together, because again, I get myopically focused on the Operation Gladio paramilitary piece of this. And while I talk a lot about the international syndicate, that was for me, when you approached me in doing this series, it provided kind of the opportunity to transition into, it's not that I don't know who they are and I mention them when they come up, but this is a collective way of presenting the background that feeds into so many of the different corporations and the people in the shadow government seats. So I think this is instrumental to the entire Gladio revealing, is tying the pieces back to the people that are the puppet controllers, because the politicians that we see, generally speaking, are puppets. And a lot of the people that we know who their names are indeed themselves puppet as well. What you don't see is these people that you've been revealing through Skull and Bones that are more in the actual intricate rungs of the international syndicate. And I just think it's a natural complement to what we're doing.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, you've gone into excruciating detail on what Operation Gladio is, and I think this series is really explaining the who and the why
Correct.
in more detail. I mean, yeah, I think that's I agree with you. It's 100% complimentary, and it is always a lot of fun talking with you. So,
Ditto. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and we will be back next Thursday at noon for another installment of this series. Thanks again for being here.
oops, next Thursday I may not be back from Boston in time. So, can we pick another day?
We can. We'll talk about that off camera.
Excellent. Cheers,
Awesome.
everyone.
Bye.